In the last week of November 1950, a Chinese regimental commander named Sung Shi-lun sat in a frozen Kankan post above a Korean mountain pass and dictated a message to his superiors that his own political officers did not want recorded. He had just thrown 3 fresh regiments against a hill held by a company of American Marines who were, by every calculation available to him, supposed to already be dead. He said, "The men on the hill do not know they are surrounded. Or they know, and it does not matter to them." That sentence traveled up the Chinese chain of command with a kind of quiet alarm attached to it, because Sung was not a man given to superstition. He had fought the Japanese. He had fought the nationalists across 4 provinces. He had planned this operation for months, moving nearly 120,000 men through the mountains of North Korea in near total secrecy, undetected by American reconnaissance. Positioned to encircle and annihilate an entire Marine division in the high frozen country around the Chosin Reservoir. The plan was sound, the numbers were overwhelming. And somewhere in the first week of December, in the ice and the dark, it started to come apart, not because the plan was wrong, but because of what the men in the American lines refused to do. This is not a story about a victory the way victories are usually told. There is no triumphant advance in this story. For most of it, the Marines are not moving forward at all. They are surrounded, outnumbered, frozen, and cut off from resupply in temperatures that drop to nearly 30 degrees below zero, cold enough to freeze plasma solid. Cold enough that rifles had to be fired every few minutes just to keep the actions from seizing shut. This is the story of what the Chinese army wrote down, in captured documents and prisoner interrogations, and after-the-fact assessments, about the 6 days they spent trying to erase the 1st Marine Division from a Korean mountainside, and could not. The Chosin campaign began with a strategic miscalculation on the American side that historians have spent 70 years dissecting. General Douglas MacArthur believed the war was nearly won, that Chinese intervention was a bluff, and that his forces could push to the Yalu River before winter fully closed the mountains. The 1st Marine Division, under Major General Oliver Smith, advanced along a single narrow road running north from Hungnam through the frozen highlands toward the reservoir. Strung out across nearly 70 miles of terrain that offered a defender every advantage and an attacker almost none. Smith did not share MacArthur's confidence. He slowed his advance against direct orders, insisted on building an airstrip at a village called Hagaru-ri, and stockpiled supplies at intervals along the road, decisions that would later be credited with saving the division. On the night of November 27th, the Chinese 9th Army Group revealed itself. 8 full divisions, more than 100,000 soldiers, rose out of the mountains on both sides of the road and struck simultaneously at every American position along 70 miles of frozen ground. The plan called for the annihilation of the entire division within a week. Among the positions targeted was a stretch of high ground above the Toktong Pass, the single choke point the Chinese needed to control if they wanted to cut the Marine Division permanently in 2. That position was held by Fox Company, 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, 240 men commanded by Captain William Barber, digging in on a barren hilltop with no illusions about what was coming. Barber told his men before the first assault that they were not there to make a stand that looked good in a report. They were there because if that hill fell, Marines further down the road would die trying to fight their way past it. He told them the hill was going to hold because it had to hold, and that was the entire content of the plan. The first assault came just after midnight. A Chinese regiment moving up the slope in white winter uniforms, nearly invisible against the snow, blowing whistles and bugles to coordinate in the dark. Lieutenant Sun Wei-guo, an officer with the Chinese 59th Division, whose account survived in a document translated by American military intelligence in early 1951, wrote of that first assault. "We were told the position was lightly held and would collapse under pressure within the hour. We committed the full weight of the attack believing this. The hour passed. Then 2 hours passed. We were still on the slope. The Marines on that hill were running Browning machine guns until the barrels glowed, throwing grenades until their arms gave out, and holding a perimeter that on paper should not have survived contact with a force that outnumbered them by a factor of 10. Private First Class Robert Easel, a machine gunner from Corsicana, Texas, manned a position on the northern edge of the perimeter through 5 separate nights of assault. When his gun jammed in sub-zero cold, he cleared it with bare hands rather than lose the seconds it would take to put his frozen gloves back on. He was hit twice, refused evacuation twice, and stayed at his gun because, in his own words given decades later, somebody had to be there when the whistles started again. Corporal Kim Yong-shik, a North Korean-born soldier serving as an interpreter and auxiliary with Chinese forces, was captured on the third night of the siege and gave an account to interrogators that was later forwarded through intelligence channels alongside the Chinese officer reports. He said the men on the hill fired as though ammunition would always arrive in time, as though reinforcement was certain, and it was only after his capture that he learned neither of those things was true. He said this confused him more than anything else about the battle. Fox Company held that hill for 5 days and 6 nights without relief, without resupply by road, and with wounded men who could not be evacuated lying in the open, in temperatures that killed by exposure as efficiently as any weapon. Of the 240 men who dug in on that first night, 118 were killed or wounded by the time relief finally broke through. The hill did not fall. Major Zhang Fu-lin, a battalion commander whose captured notebook was catalogued by American intelligence officers after the campaign, wrote an entry that has been quoted in more than one post-war military study. He wrote, "I have fought since 1937. I have taken fortified positions with fewer men than I sent against this hill. I did not take this hill. I do not write this proudly. I write it because my superiors must understand that these soldiers do not fight as we were told Americans fight." Further south, at the perimeter around Haguru-ri, the pattern repeated itself with a different cast of characters and the same result. Private First Class Hector Caffarata, a 19-year-old rifleman from New Jersey, spent one entire assault standing in the open in his socks, having leapt from his sleeping bag without time to find his boots, firing and throwing back live grenades that had landed among his wounded comrades until his rifle barrel was too hot to hold. He held that position for hours in temperatures that would have given a resting man frostbite, and did not stop until he was finally hit himself. When the Chinese soldiers who survived that assault were later interrogated, several of them independently described a single American who seemed unable to be killed, standing without cover, throwing their own grenades back at them before they detonated. One of them told his interrogator that his officers had described the Marines as tired, undersupplied, and beaten. He said that whatever he had encountered on that line was none of those things. General Song Shilun's own after-action summary, recovered later and studied extensively by both Chinese and American military historians, contains a passage that reads less like a battle report and more like a confession. He wrote that the operation had achieved numerical superiority at every point of contact, and had still failed to destroy the Marine Division as planned. He attributed this not to any single tactical failure, but to what he called the unusual cohesion of the American units under encirclement. A cohesion that did not degrade as the Chinese doctrine predicted it should degrade once a force was cut off and outnumbered. He noted that Chinese soldiers, trained to expect that a surrounded and freezing enemy would seek terms or attempt a chaotic breakout, instead found the Marines conducting what one captured document called an organized fighting withdrawal. A controlled march of an entire division down 70 miles of contested mountain road, bringing its wounded, its equipment, and its dead with it, fighting for every mile rather than abandoning the line to save the column. When correspondents later asked Major General Oliver Smith whether the division had been retreating, he corrected them without heat, in the flat and now famous phrasing that entered the official record. He said, "Retreat, hell." They were simply attacking in a different direction. It was not a boast. It was closer to an accurate military description of a division that fought its way out of an encirclement designed to destroy it, inflicting casualties on the Chinese 9th Army Group so severe that the force was effectively removed from the war for the following 3 months. Chinese military historians, writing decades after the war in accounts eventually available to Western researchers, have generally agreed that the 9th Army Group at Chosin suffered catastrophic losses to combat and to the cold, and that the encirclement, despite its scale and its secrecy, failed in its central objective. The men who dug those positions into frozen Korean hillsides in the winter of 1950 came home to very little fanfare. There was no clean victory to celebrate, only a division that had marched out of a trap that should have ended it, carrying its wounded and its dead the entire way. The Chinese officers who fought them left behind notebooks and reports that, read together, described the same thing again and again in different words, an enemy that did not behave the way encircled. Frozen, outnumbered soldiers were supposed to behave. They did not have a name for it in their own doctrine. The Marines who survived it never needed one. They called it the Chosin Few, and they called the reservoir, in the bitter joke that followed them home, frozen Chosin, and they left it at that.